Another video. It's Picho here, and as always, we have Chris on a Thursday afternoon from Uganda. Hello, Chris. How is it?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. Thank you for giving us your time. How is Cape Town?
Yeah, Cape Town's it's a little bit cold and been raining a lot. We've had a lot of rain over the last week or so. Lots of flooding around. So it's not been great, but it's a bit sunny right now. So we're okay at the moment.
That's nice. So today, guys, I don't know. Chris is just going to tell about is going to tell us about how the transfer works, how everything from the agents to the transfers to the negotiations. We just want to know like all the insider knowledge of how it goes down. So, Chris, you are an agent and you have been in this like in the business for a long time. Just can you tell us like how you started it and how it's going at the moment?
Yeah. So I mean, I think as I've mentioned before, that it all actually started for me working in a club in Lesotho. So I obviously that was my first experience working in football. Was running a football club. Did that for 7 years. Worked for a federation for 2 years. So obviously in that time, I learned a lot about the where players in Africa need a lot of help in terms of being able to identify opportunities, being able to negotiate contracts to try and avoid being exploited by clubs. And a lot of that was happening in Africa. So it really drove me towards maybe getting involved in the agency business and trying to help players get better opportunities, help players be able to negotiate better contracts and stop exploitation of players. And that's kind of how this all came about. And so, yeah, 11 years experience working in football across Southern Africa. But that split between sort of club level, federation level, and now in the agency.
Yeah, that's really nice. That's really nice. 11 years. That's a long time. That's a
Yes,
lot of that's
yeah,
a lot of experience.
yeah. I mean, it's gone quickly. It's 11 years here in say Lesotho for 9 years, 2 years now in Cape Town. It's gone quickly, but yeah, the whole experience for the last 11 years has been really good.
That's amazing. Yeah, I just want us like ask you to tell like is it important for a football player to choose an agent or an agent is the one who chooses a football player?
That's actually a really good question, and it happens both ways. So, I mean, firstly, different agents have different objectives. I can certainly give from our experience, we try and identify players that we feel we can help and that we feel could potentially get better opportunities by us working with them. So, for us, if we find players who we feel have, and we like to look at younger players or players who are in maybe more undervalued markets. And if we find those players that we feel we can find them better opportunities, then quite often we'll approach them. But what you'll always get as an agent is you'll get a lot of times where players will approach agents because they're looking for an agent to work with, and they hope that you can help them get opportunities that they're looking for. So it does happen both ways. Is it important for players to have agents? I think so. And I'm not just saying that because obviously, we look to work with players, but what we do is we know, first of all, we have the contacts and the networks. So we can reach out to our contacts networks to look for opportunities for players. Players on their own may not have access to those kind of networks. Secondly, we have experience in doing contract negotiations and understanding how that works and how to get the best contract for our client. We know what to look out for in a contract, what maybe needs to be included, what shouldn't be included, what we maybe need to negotiate, maybe what needs to be taken out. Look for ways that clubs sometimes are trying to exploit players. It happens. And so it's important that we're there to help support them with that. But also, we're there to guide and support players on and off the field. What is the best decisions to make in terms of development of their career? What's the right club to move to? Is it better to stay where they are? Is it better to move on? Sometimes to a player, they'll see an opportunity to move, think it's the best one to do. And maybe, as an agent, this club maybe is renowned for not looking after their players. Or maybe, you go to that club, you might not play very much, whereas the stage of the career you're in, you should be looking to stay where you are and play regularly. So we kind of understand how that works and can advise a player. Often a player without an agent as well, especially if it's a young player, will use the advice of parents. And parents play a real key role in a player's career. And I always say it's very important to work with the parents of players. But parents themselves don't have the experience of working in the football industry most of the time. And they also maybe look at things differently to actually what the reality is, and also won't always necessarily give the best advice. So I think, I think we play a very important role for players. I think a lot of agents have a bad, agents as an industry probably has quite a bad reputation in some ways, because a lot of people perceive agents as just trying to make money out of players, make money out of football. And I can't speak for everybody, but I know from our perspective as an agency, we're actually doing it because we want to help players, and we believe in the talent that's here in Africa. We believe in trying to help young people on and off the field. And that's why we have a very holistic approach to the way we do things, where we don't just look for moves for players and negotiate contracts for players. We look, how can we help them holistically? How can we help them grow as players, but also grow as humans? So I think we play a real key role, as long as your intentions are the right thing and you do the job properly, and I think also what's important, if you're qualified and experienced enough and connected enough to be able to do the job.
Like before we continue to the other questions, this is just I just want to understand, because a lot of young people, they come out and they maybe ask me sometimes, how do I become an agent? Do I really need to like know all the rules, or is there something special? Do I need to go and do exam or study about it? How do someone become an agent, a football agent,
So FIFA
player
have
agent?
just Yeah, sure. So FIFA have just changed the rules again in the last sort of 18 months. And now you need to have a license from FIFA to be allowed to be an agent. In order to do that, you have to sit and pass an exam. So, I mean, to start from the beginning of the process, you have to register on the FIFA agents platform online to be registered as an agent, or at least to be registered to be allowed to take the agent's exam. Once you're able to take the agent's exam, you have to register with a federation. That may be your local federation or any other federation. When they put out a application to apply for the exam, you need to go and register and pay whatever fee that particular federation might be charging, and then you have to sit and pass the exam. Now, the exam, you have to get 75%, and you need to really understand the rules and regulations around player status and transfers, around FIFA, the sort of FIFA ethics code, the FIFA statutes, child safeguarding. And there's basically a sort of 600-page document that you need to go through and really understand, because all the questions, although they're multiple choice and you're allowed the document with you in the exam, there's about 600 pages to understand, and you've got an hour to answer all the questions. So you need to have a good understanding of it first. A lot of people fail. I did the very first exam after they changed the rules again. So that was in April last year. I sat at the exam, and only 50, I think it was 52% of people that sat it passed it. So it's not an easy exam to do, but once you do pass it, you then have to pay a license fee, which is $600 US dollars for the first year, and then after that you have to pay, I think it's $300 US dollars to renew it each year. But then once you've got your license, you are a licensed agent and you're allowed to work in the industry. So that's the process. There's a lot of people out there who are working without licenses, and I know FIFA are trying to clamp down on that, but that is the process you have to go through to become an official FIFA licensed agent.
And okay, if you have the license, does that mean that you only like allowed to work in one area, or it is you can work anywhere in the world, or you have to work in your federation?
Yeah, so again, that's a really, really good question, because I know there's been a few gray areas about this. So firstly, the license allows you to work globally as an agent. So you can work anywhere in the world as an agent. However, every federation has been asked to put together their national guidelines on agents, and they have to align to the FIFA. So FIFA, I mean, what people I think quite often don't realize, FIFA rules and regulations are always related to international matters. So national federations have to govern their own domestic football and how things work in the country. So FIFA have their global rules that FIFA licensed agents have to work under, but then to work in different federations, you've got to follow their guidelines as well. And a lot of the time, they'll just be the same as FIFA's. But some countries have rules that mean you have to be registered in with their FA to be able to work in their country. Now that might, if you've got a player, if you're registered in South Africa, you've got a South African player, for example. If you want to take them to the UK, you can. But if you want to work in the UK market and move players within clubs in the UK market, for example, you have to be registered with the English FA. So you have to have your FIFA license to start with, just to be able to be an agent. But in some countries like the UK, you also need to be registered there to be allowed to work in that market. So I'm, for example, I'm registered in the UK. So if I want to be able to work in the UK market, I can do. And it's very, I mean, you just have to apply to be registered. And if you've got your FIFA license, as long as there's no real reason why they shouldn't register you, you do get registered. So it's quite easy, but you do have to follow all the local federation guidelines, and that can be tricky because they're not easy to find in some countries.
Okay, that's really nice. It's really good to understand that. And just now, like, let's go to the work, like how you guys work, how you put everything down. How do the transfer negotiations work between club and agent? Because I know even when a club and club are negotiating, the agent is always also there, right?
Yeah, sometimes. So again, there's different ways that agents work, and things are different with every transfer. So sometimes you will have agents that are representing clubs. So those agents will actually be involved uh, in the transfer negotiations, in trying to help the club get the best deal for a certain player. And they'll be involved in that transaction between the club and the player. Sometimes you have dual representation where you'll represent one of the clubs involved as well as the client. And that's allowed, but what you're not allowed to do is represent both clubs and the player in a transaction. So yes, you are sometimes involved in the negotiations between the clubs, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes the clubs will do it without an agent. In my experience, what we do we work more with the players rather than clubs. So if we've got a player we're representing, sometimes a club might approach us and say they want to sign our client, in which case we will then enter into negotiations with that club. But obviously, if the player's under contract somewhere else, the club have to go club to club first before we can negotiate on behalf of the player. So in that case, sometimes you will get involved with the club that's approached you and help put them in touch with the club your client is with currently. And then you'll get into those negotiations as an agent for the player with the club that's trying to engage the player. And then that's where your role comes in. In other ways, what you might look to do is, in a different situation, is you might go and try and look for a club for your player. So if you feel that there are clubs out there that are looking for the profile of player that you represent, then you might go and approach that club and present to them the player that you've got. And then you try and market that player to them and hope that they might sign the player. And then the other ways it sometimes works is that sometimes there are other agents representing clubs looking for certain profiles of players, and they invite you to present your player to them to present to that club. So you can see there's many different ways that it actually works, depending on the club that's looking for the player, what you might be looking for your player. If a club wants a particular player, there are different ways that these transfers actually work.
Okay, it's really nice, and be like, I know there is always this thing they call players clause, like a clause in a player's contract.
Mm.
What are the types of like players clauses that you guys need to negotiate, maybe put in the player's contract, or what are the types, like
Yeah.
people need to know that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different clauses that could go into a contract, and again, it depends. I mean, sometimes you might have a player that for this club it's a really big coup for them to sign the player. Sometimes for your player it might be that the club's a really good opportunity. So both sides will might be looking for certain clauses depending what their negotiating power is. So sometimes, I mean, there's so many different. Sometimes a club might hold or we might put into a contract a release clause. So it might be that if a club offers a certain amount, then that triggers a clause that means if the player wants to move, he's allowed to talk to that club. So sometimes you might try and get that in there to stop a club from um, pricing you out of a move. So, for example, I won't say who, but I've got a goalkeeper that with his current club, he has a clause in his contract that if a team offers a certain amount of dollars for that player is free to talk to that club. His current club can't stop him from doing that because they've hit the release clause. And a lot of it, sometimes that release clause might be quite high and might be above the value that maybe a club see the player at. But sometimes, but that doesn't mean the club can't accept a lower offer. But obviously, what it does mean is the club can't stop the player from talking if it's a reasonable amount that's been offered. So you get release clauses. You sometimes get clauses where players will get certain bonuses if they play a certain number of games, if they score a certain number of goals. A lot of it's performance based. If they played a certain number of games throughout the contract, it goes up no matter which year it is. Clubs hold options in contracts sometimes, which is a little bit of a controversial one. I know FIFA aren't too keen on it, but where a club can say, okay, we'll give you a 3-year contract, but we hold an option for an extra year. And then the club, if they want to hold the option for the extra year, they can activate that, and there's nothing you can do about it as a player. But normally, if there's an option in the contract, those optional years, there'll be certain conditions where the salary goes up, and there's maybe another signing on fee and all of that sort of thing. So there's many, many different clauses that can go into a contract. Some of them are to benefit the player, some of them are to benefit the club. But it all depends really on who the club is they're going to, who your client is, what's in the best interest of everybody, what clauses to put in there. That some of it gives you the negotiation power, some of it gives the power to the clubs. But there's many, many different clauses that you could talk about.
And again, the other thing is that we always ask, we the public always want to know, like, if the player if the player does not agree with the club, what happens now? Like, does the agent come in between, or is there something that is done?
So you mean if the player doesn't agree with the contract that's offered?
Yeah, on a
Yeah.
transfer.
So normally as the agent, you're the one that's negotiating for the player. So normally the player doesn't actually talk to the club. You talk to the club as the agent and do all the negotiations. But then you'll obviously whatever the offer is from the club after your negotiations, you'll take it to the player and you explain to the player what the offer is. You'll give your advice as an agent that we think you should accept this offer, or we think we should negotiate it up, or negotiate this clause, negotiate that clause. And then once you and the player are in agreement, then you will go back as the agent and do that renegotiation. But normally you'll be handling those negotiations as an agent. And hopefully you eventually come to a deal where you're happy, as in you and the client, and the club is also happy. Sometimes it will be that you just can never get to a point where you agree, and then it kind of dies. We move on. But it's normally you as the agent are the one doing the negotiations with the club on behalf of your client.
So the player doesn't talk to the club. It's the agent who does the whole
No,
work. He's the one who knows what the player wants, right?
yeah, normally. I mean, sometimes you get situations where clubs go directly to players because they don't want to deal with agents or they don't know who the agent is. And normally in that case, the player will insist that they talk to the agent. But it does happen that players, especially if they're not so well advised, or people try and take advantage and want to avoid the agent and can kind of uh, convince you to do it without the agent, then they might talk directly. But no, normally as the agent, you're the one that will deal all of that. And that's your job as an agent. Your job is to negotiate and get the best contract you can for the player. They shouldn't have to worry about doing that. They focus on their job. Our job is to help them get the best deals you can.
Okay, okay. Then there is how does the club pay the transfer fees? Do they pay it at once or they pay it gradually through
More,
like the
yeah, sorry. So more often than not, they'll pay in installments. It's quite rare these days that you pay a full transfer fee. Now, I find in Africa you do see it a bit more often that's paid in full because you don't have such big transfer fees as maybe you do in Europe and other parts. But in general, I'd say most of the transfers, yeah, things are done in installments now. So if you sign a player, maybe you sign a player on a 3-year contract, you'll pay a certain portion up front, and then you'll pay in installments. You might, and they can be over a number of years, the installments, not even just months. Sometimes it will be over the course of the contract. Sometimes a player will leave before you've even finished paying the transfer fee off. So I mean, it happens. So yeah, I'd say majority of time. And look, in Africa, you don't get loads of transfers where fees are involved. It's probably more in Europe that you do, but when you do have transfer fees involved, then yeah, quite often, probably more often than not, it's done in installments.
and again the other thing is how does the agent now benefit from the player? Is the player to pay the agent or the agent pays himself from the player's transfer fee?
Yeah. So what will normally happen? Normally, in your contract with your client, you will have in there a commission that the player pays you. So it's you normally put that into the contract. But quite often, what will happen, especially, and it doesn't happen as much in Africa, apart from maybe the professional leagues, but certainly if you go into Europe and stuff, what will happen generally is the club, sorry, will pay the agent's fee on behalf of the player. So often at the professional level, players don't normally have to pay anything to the agents. The clubs will pay it. Now, sometimes, and again, there's rules that are trying to stop this now, but the FIFA rules kind of stop this from happening. But there's, you sometimes I think you get situations where agents do get money from the club and the player. We don't believe that's right. If the club are going to pay on the player's behalf, then you shouldn't charge your player. And I think it's nice when you don't have to charge your player because it's you don't have to bother the player about paying you. You don't have to be asking your client to pay. The club are doing it on their behalf. So yeah, I would say more often than not, certainly at the pro level, clubs will normally pay agents' fees, not the players. FIFA I've kind of, again, there is a FIFA rule that's been brought in now where the player has to pay the agent, but they allow the club to pay on the player's behalf as long as they're earning less than $200,000 a year. So yeah, I would say more often than not, clubs pay the player agents' fees, but probably less so in Africa. South Africa, they generally do. Other countries, they probably don't because they don't really have the funds to do it. But globally, it's more the clubs that pay the agents' fees.
It is like everywhere. Like at the moment, if the player is earning $200,000 below, the club is the one to pay, right?
The club are allowed to pay, yeah. So the rule, the new FIFA rule is if it's 200,000 USD or less that the player is earning, the club is allowed to pay the agent's fees on your behalf as a player. But if the player is earning over 200,000 USD a year, then the player has to pay the agent's fees. The club can't. That's the new FIFA rule. But
Okay,
the
okay.
reality, to be honest with you, the reality is that's probably not happening at the moment. The clubs probably are still paying the agents' fees. I mean, I'm not dealing with players that are earning that kind of amount at the moment, but you'll probably find that the FIFA rules a lot of them have been suspended currently because of there's a few cases happening in Europe. So a lot of these rules haven't really been implemented properly yet, but if they do get implemented properly, then that's what the rule's going to be, that the players that are earning over 200,000 USD a year will have to pay the agent themselves. The club can't do it on your behalf.
That's nice. And the other thing, I've talked to, I don't know if you know Kamaso. He's also a player agent.
Right.
But yeah, we were talking, and he was telling me there was these conferences you always attend about agents, maybe in Africa and what. Can you like tell us what these conferences are about, and you guys what you maybe talk about there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've not actually attended any of the agents' conferences yet, so yeah, I'm aware of them. I think a lot of the time, it's a networking opportunity to be able to network with other agents. And remember, there's a lot of collaborations that happen between agents. A lot of agents actually work together on player deals, and people think that most of the time agents competing with each other. But actually, most of the time, you get a lot more business done by working together because we've all got different clients, we've all got different markets we're working in, we've all got different networks. So actually, a lot of the time, you can get more deals done by collaborating. So I think a lot of the time, it's around that. But also, probably an opportunity to discuss different trends in different countries, what's happening. Also, as well, at the moment, there's been quite a lot of um, what's the word? A lot of disagreement, perhaps, with the FIFA rules that have come out. And as you've probably seen, there's a lot of cases going on. That's why I said they've suspended a lot of the rules at the moment. And I think a lot of people get together and discuss that kind of thing. So I haven't actually attended any of the agents' conferences yet, but I can imagine that's generally what it's for. And it's not because I don't want to go. I just haven't really had an opportunity to go. I think they're good. I always think conferences are a good opportunity to network with other people in your industry. But yeah, just haven't had a chance to attend yet. But I'm sure that's what goes on.
Okay, again, this is another thing. I know you work both in Europe and Africa. I just wanted to know, like, when you like remove the transfer fees from Europe, is there any difference between the transfers, how they are done in Africa and how they are done in Europe?
Is there any difference? I mean, not massively. I mean, transfers are still done the same way, I would say. In in Africa, I think everybody knows things are done a bit differently to in Europe. So the deals are different. I'd say the deals a lot of the time are different. I mean, firstly, the figures that are involved. Secondly, because a lot of the time clubs can't afford transfer fees, there's other ways of doing deals. You have to be a lot more creative, I think, in Africa. Sometimes you have to look more at sell-on fees rather than actual upfront transfer fees. But I mean, I would say generally, still the way transfers are done is still the same. It's still the same kind of approach. At the end of the day, if a player's under contract, club to club have to negotiate. Um, you then have to negotiate on behalf of your client with the club on the contract. So things generally still work the same way, I would say. Just sometimes the deals are a little bit different.
There is also this. How is the transfer fee determined? Is it how the player performs? Okay, if maybe the player was really good this season, does this transfer remain? Does it go up? Like, how do we determine the transfer fee?
You know what? Football's a funny business because it's probably the only business in the world where values of things don't actually make sense. It's not like another business where things are valued because there's a practical reason why things are valued at a certain value. Um, in football, it's down to what value people want to put on things. And there's so many factors that go into a transfer fee. Sometimes it's the length of the contract. So if a player still has a long-term contract, then you're in a position to be able to ask for more money. If a player's in the last year of a contract and you know that next year you might lose that player for nothing, then you quite often will take less. Sometimes, yes, it's to do with the form of a player. A player may have not scored last season, and no one's really talking about him now. This season, he scored 35 goals. All the big clubs suddenly are looking at him, and now you're in a position where you can charge, or you can ask for a higher transfer fee. It might be to do with the investment you've put into a player. Maybe you feel like what you've paid for the player, what's cost you over the years, you feel like you need to value him at a certain amount. Sometimes it's the number of clubs involved in wanting to sign the player. If the more clubs you want, the more bargaining goes on, the higher the transfer fee is. So I don't think there's any real, it's not like you put a value on a player because of A, B, and C. There's so many different factors that go into it, and sometimes just doesn't make sense. Sometimes you look at it and say, how can a player be worth £50 million, for example? I mean, what else in the world can you look at something and say it's worth £50 million? It's sometimes the fees, just you look at it and it's just like, where have they got this number from? It's just like it's come out of the air. But yeah, it's lots of many factors that will determine what the transfer fee is.
Then, or is there a difference when signing a player who is under a contract in another club and a free agent?
Yeah, so I mean, a free agent, if you haven't got a contract somewhere, then you can't ask if let's say, for example, let's say Harry Kane, let's say his contract at Bayern Munich is now finished. As Bayern Munich, you can't ask for a transfer fee for the player because he's no longer your player. His contract's run out and he's a free agent. If a player holds a contract with you, if Harry Kane has a year left on his contract uh, and Manchester United want to sign Harry Kane, they have to put in a transfer offer in, or a transfer request into his club. So yeah, if you're a free agent, you're free to sign anywhere, as long as there's no other sort of obligations that you have with any of your with your previous club. Whereas if you're under contract, then yes, the club is allowed to command a transfer fee and have the decision whether to let you go or not.
Again, this is what I also wanted to know. Does every player who sign get a sign-on fee or like a sign-on bonus when they're signing a new contract, or it's special for talented player like non-players, world stars?
Yeah, again, it really depends firstly where you're signing, what club you're signing for, what country you're signing in, what your agent does. Most countries now, you can get signing on fees. Even I work in Lesotho quite often. I've got a few players in Lesotho, which is one of the smaller leagues in the world. And clubs there will pay signing on fees. No, we're not going to pay the signing on fees that you get in South Africa or Europe, but they'll get a signing on fee that is actually relative to their contract that they have and relative to the league they're playing in. Actually, can sometimes not be too bad. It's still one-off payments, or sometimes paid in installments. So really, also what helps, if you've signed as a free agent for a club and they haven't had to pay a transfer fee, then it's easier to get a signing on fee or a bigger signing on fee. Because if the club has spent money on a transfer fee, they've got less left to be able to offer you on a signing on fee. Quite often you've got to actually add everything up. What's the total package? Signing on fee, salary, transfer fee, everything else. So a lot of the deals now these days, it is signing on fees, but the amount of the signing on fee, again, so many different factors. Also, some places you'll get just a signing on fee when you sign the contract. Some countries you'll get signing on fees every year. So if you've signed a 3-year contract, sometimes clubs will give you a signing on fee for all 3 years. Sometimes you'll get it just in the year you've signed. So again, does differ from country to country. It is so many different factors, but most places now you do see signing on fees of some kind in a lot of the deals.
That's really nice. That's really nice to know. Uh, Chris, I think you've answered the most important questions that we really ask about transfer, about how agents work, and how about like how the transfer windows work. And okay, this is just another question I just wanted to, because I know most people don't follow the African football, like how the landscape in African football is, but is every country in Africa have the same transfer window? Like, do we have two windows in the African transfer market?
Yeah, I mean, I think in most countries you do. I mean, there is a rule where I think you're only allowed to have 12 weeks a year where you have a transfer window open, and that's got to be done over 2 separate windows. So normally you'll have an 8-week period and a 1-month period every year. Now, what you do have is some countries, they play sort of the January to December calendar. Others will play the sort of the July to to June calendar. So some countries you'll get the July and August as the 2 month window, whereas others might just have July as a 1 month window. So it generally they all have to have 12-week windows, and generally over 2 different periods. But sometimes it would depend what calendar they're playing with, which will be 2 weeks, which will be 1 week.
So basically, FIFA allows you to have like two windows. I mean, 12 weeks a year
Yes.
for transfers to happen, right?
Yes, yeah. So you're
Oh,
allowed basically 8 weeks and 4 weeks across a year. So you've got to have two windows. One's 8 weeks, one's 4 weeks generally.
okay. That's why in other countries it opens in July and closes in the end of August.
Yes, correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And
Yeah.
normally, what you'll get is the countries where the season starts sort of August, they will have the 2 weeks for July and August, and you'll get 1 week in January. But other countries that maybe play the January to December calendar, they'll have 2 weeks. They maybe will have 2 months in January and February, and then 1 month in maybe July. So that's the difference. But generally, you'll get a window for about 8 weeks and one window for about 4 weeks at some point across the year.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, I really appreciate you for just dropping on us that knowledge, letting us know what really happens behind the curtain. Thank you very much. Any last words before we go?
Not really. No, just hope that everybody's looking forward to the new season. Hopefully, everybody's enjoying seeing who their teams are signing ahead of next season. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what else is going to happen over the next few weeks before a lot of. I know most countries the season will be starting in August, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, I did. I think everyone, and I know as you personally, I know this is like the busy time for you,
Yeah,
but I pray for you, and I know that I pray that everything goes well and you just make the best out of this time.
great. Thank you very much, and always good to speak to you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, guys, that's all we had from Chris. I hope you